Hi, I'm Anders Indset, and I'm about to have a productive conversation with Mike Vardy.
Welcome to A Productive Conversation. I'm Mike Vardy, and I'm excited to welcome Anders Indset to the podcast today. Now, Anders wrote a book that I couldn't help but tear through just simply because it had the word code in it and it had Viking in it. And the idea of just exploring another framework was really, really compelling to me. So the book is called The Viking Code, The Art and Science of Norwegian Success. It came out in October of 2024, but we're getting around to sharing this with you now. And this, if you're listening to this as it drops, is the perfect time of year. You just start to look at different approaches and frameworks and philosophies that you can bring into your life. Now, Anders is known as the business philosopher. He's a Norwegian-born writer and deep tech investor, so he dances on both sides of the equation there. He's also a 5-time Spiegel best-selling author with 6 international books to his name and has been recognized by Thinkers 50 as one of the most influential thinkers in technology and leadership for the years to come. And you can tell just by our conversation, we get into the concept of finite and infinite games, and that goes down a rabbit hole that we had to climb out of. We get into some of the timely versus timeless stuff that we can learn from, and how do we achieve depth? Can AI help us with that? He has a real profound understanding of the impact of exponential technologies, and he demonstrates why leadership and its relationship to philosophy are more relevant than ever. And you can also feel that throughout the vibe of our conversation today. He's a trusted sparring partner and advisor to international CEOs, political leaders, and a guest lecturer at leading international business schools. He is the founder of the Njordis Group, the Global Institute of Leadership and Technology, and the Quantum Economy Alliance. He's got another book coming out, which we touch on during our conversation as well. I am certain this will not be the only time I talk to Anders, but for now, enjoy this conversation with Anders Indset, and a productive one at that. Enjoy. Anders, thanks so much for taking the time to join me today. We're going to talk about the Viking Code, which to me, okay. So I have to say, when it comes to, I'm a pro wrestling fan, and there is a tag team right now that is called the Viking Raiders. And when I watch them wrestle and then I read your book, I'm like, wait a minute, those Viking Raiders don't quite live up to what I've read what Anders put in the book, which then goes to show how much wrestling is scripted and maybe even not completely accurate in its depiction of what Vikings are. So the book, again, is called The Viking Code, The Art and Science of Norwegian Success. Can you, right out of the gate, dispel one of the myths that people who don't know much about Vikings may have firmly entrenched in their brains?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to kick off, because with the book, it's much more about the modern Vikings. Obviously, there are relations to the history, but overcoming the conquer and brutality of raping and raving and killing and the barbarian Vikings. That's not what this story is about. It kept the sense of collectivism and the creativity, obviously, but it's much more also about how this culture that was a culture of exploration and also of putting in the effort has now also turned into a culture where you can perform on finite goals in, like, if you reference to sport, but you keep the values, you keep the ethos, you keep the collectivism. So the book is about, a high performance culture rooted in values. And one of the core concepts of the book is a Norwegian word called the dugnad. So we heard about the Danish hygge, and we have hygge in Norway as well. But dugnad is very much tied to the Norwegian culture, and it's all about putting in the effort for others. And it's like voluntary work without the work part. So you just show up and you put in the effort for the community, be it communal service, building a fence, or more structured forms of supporting sport activities. And that is so deeply engraved in the Norwegian culture that you grow up understanding that you have to take care of everyone else. And this has now become some kind of reinforcement learning model, because it's inevitable not to grasp the concept of, if you want to perform and if you want to grow and develop, you are probably better off if everyone else around you is better. So if you take care of everyone else and uplift them, you have a better playing field, a playing ground, a practice field to practice your art. And that is very much what the book is about, how to build a high performance culture that is deeply rooted in values.
It's funny, as you were talking about this, I couldn't help but think of, again, the idea of the James Carse book, the finite and infinite games, right? The idea of games that live within games. And it's a fantastic read. I know Simon Sinek wrote the book called I think it's called The Infinite Game is what he wrote, which kind of takes elements of that and maybe propels it more into the business world. But one of the things that I noticed when I was going through the book is the idea of micro ambitions. And I think when we talk about productivity and managing one's time and success, we think grand, right? We think of intentions as these big gestures. And for me, intentions, the word intention is just like, what do you intend to do? It could be small. It could be, it could be large. So what role do micro ambitions play in the Viking Code and in Norwegian success?
Yeah, I think it's a good reference to what you say about the intention. And um, what we humans have is the capability to come up with better explanation. Basically, what I think is a part of the journey is progress. And when I use progress, I refer that to experience progress. So the experience of learning, the experience of progress is something that is very fundamental to what it means to be a mensch, a human being. And that is the qualia, the experience of your own experience, the conscious experience of being alive, the Lebendigkeit, the vitality of life. And that to me has very much to do with progress. And that type of growth, if you can break that down, if you have a vision or you have big goals, there's nothing wrong with that. But most of humanity will not win a gold medal or a Nobel Prize or whatever. But what we can do is that we can measure against ourselves. And that is basically the progress. So everything in life is compound interest. So if you take those small steps, they compound into then the finite goals or medals or fortune or fame or whatever extrinsic motivation there might be. And that is the micro ambition. It's basically to set out to take that perfect next step and to experience that you have managed to progress in a big goal that seems far away. Those small steps that accumulates into the big achievement. That is the very foundation of also the success within sport. If you go to practice every day, you move the bar an inch, you have the perfect step, you run the marathon. It comes down to every single next step. And that is the analogy from sport to the chapter on being micro ambitious. And I liked your relation to James P. Carse, and it's funny that you mentioned Carse because most would see the infinite game related to Simon Sinek. But I wrote a book 6 years ago, just before the infinite game of Sinek also was published, called The Quantum Economy. And what I did there was basically to take the philosophy of the theologist James P. Carse and take it over to the economy. And that was that play of, tackling ambiguities and seeing the paradoxes and having those, playful parts within the finite and an infinite game. And I think literally that humanity is capable of infinite progress in terms of coming up with better explanations. So we are tied up with finite solutions, finding the perfect answer to the wrong question. And I think it's much more about that dynamic progress where we move from solutions to better problems. And we can talk a little bit about the aspect of the problem, but that relates to the micro ambitious. It's just coming down to that nitty gritty and moving that an inch or a step forward.
The other thing is that we focus on the timely over the timeless too, right? We focus on things that are coming at us, and that's largely due to the war on our attention, right? Just the consistent barrage of things. And I find, I don't know about you, but I find I read a lot of older texts now. We're not even talking like the Stoics or anything of that nature, but like books from, the 40s, the 50s, the 70s. I mean, there's a book called Time and the Art of Living by Robert Grudlin that I'm reading, and just seeing some of those timeless elements and how they play out in today's world to just show how a lot of things really haven't changed all that much. What do you think about this focus on the timely over the timeless, this imbalance there, and its relationship to your work, not just in this book, but also the book that you mentioned?
Yeah, I think this is a great question. And the Viking Code obviously has a relationship to sport, but it also redefines success and not being the gold medals and the pinnacle of all these disciplines. And I like to get into that philosophical aspect, which is the second part of the book. And that get into that. We have built a society of optimization. And this was a great way of seeing progress. So over the past 50 years, most people lived in progress. We live longer, less people die in wars, even though we have terrible circumstances around the world. Statistically, the number of deaths is lower than any time in history. Less people live in absolute poverty. So we have had progress. And that was an optimization game where we turned it down to right and wrong. So we have maximized the art of being right. It's a binary way of thinking at the world, on the world. And that was pretty much put on steroids with social media that gives you gratification or rewards an instant reaction. And it does not reward reflection. So we put up a thumb, it's thumbs up, thumbs down. And one might question why we have division when everything we learn with communication is an instant reaction to a finite thumbs up or thumbs down. And this is how we have learned to communicate. This is how we think and react in our daily struggles. And I think this is very, very dangerous in the time of technology because it takes away the essence, not only on intentionality, but also on the perception of life itself. So when we become reactive, we become kind of sort of philosophical zombies where we trigger our dopamine and our reactive impulses, and we are not there. So we could have the same conversation that would not go into the depth, and we would have the conversation and the lights would be on, but there is no one home to perceive them. And this is the world that I see today, a divided world of reaction and not a world of reflection. So I resonate very much with your reflection on going back to these books and going back to 1932, Brave New World, Aldous Huxley, or 1984, Neil Postman, with We Are Amusing Ourselves to Death. I have added to that, we are amusing ourselves to death, but we are not enjoying the ride. So, because there is no perception of this very amusement. So I think this is a very fundamental time in human history. And I think the topic that you touch upon here is very, very timely and relevant. In particular, we will now look into the next 10 years of more rapid exponential growth in technology.
Do you think that the dawn of AI, which by the way, it's not lost on me before we hit the preamble that your initials are AI. Do you think that may allow us to go deeper rather than try to go wide? Because I use AI for some surface level stuff for sure. Let me give you an example. Actually, a great example is my son and I we're at home with my wife. She's traveling for work and dinner needs to be made. And I look at what we have and I'm like, okay, well, how do we make dinner that's going to be something that he's a picky eater? I'm like, what do we do? And I take my ingredients and I throw it into ChatGPT 4.0 and say, this is what we like. And it gives me a recipe and I make the food and it's fine. It's not great. It's fine. But that's not what I'm not trying to make an amazing meal. I'm trying to make a meal so that Colton, my son, and I can actually do things that we want to do that have nothing to do with that. And so that's like a surface level kind of exploration, as opposed to me going, I want to be an amazing chef, so therefore I'm going to go deeper into it. I think AI can allow you to do that. Like it's giving me kind of the baseline to work with. So I'm curious what you think in terms of how the advent of AI as it's kind of emerging will allow us to either will it allow us to go deeper? Will it allow us to do things like look at the Viking Code and go, how can I live by this more readily? How can I tap into my values and let some of this artificial intelligence take care of the quantity so I can afford to take care of the quality?
So here's my take on this. I have a lot of these discussions, and it seems like we have not widened the possibilistic near future to that scenario. So what I think is that Carlton, was it your son?
Colton. Yeah.
Colton, sorry,
Yep.
Colton. So the experience of making a meal with Colton is the valuable progress or experience in life, if you appreciate that. If you want to be a great cook or chef, then you could outsource everything to AI. You could wire up your brain. You could take out the whole perception of making the meal itself. You could put in a humanoid that is a replica of you. We have hacked biology. You could put that person in the room and serve as you, and you'll get to reward the gold medal. So theoretically, there is no limitation to the boundaries of that what you seek. So anything that you would call depth, we could optimize. But the question then becomes, what becomes valuable in life? So we hear a lot of discussions now. Human beings can focus on what is relevant. We have a great struggle figuring out what that is. I don't think there is any purpose to life as such. It's about giving or putting a purpose into life. And that means to free yourself from what you do not want to do more than seek what you want to become really good at. Because that is the optimization game, and technology will beat us in anything that we could put a name tag on in future if we want to do it. So the question is with AI is much more fundamental. It is, what kind of world do we want to build? If I want to, play the piano, I should not automate that. And I've just recently written a book with a quantum physicist friend of mine. It's going to be out early spring 2025. And the book is titled Singularity Paradox: Bridging the Gap Between Humanity and AI. What we do here is that we go through hacking biology and by applying quantum physics and math and try to play with some possible scenarios on the outcome of artificial general intelligence and technological singularity. So we have kind of sort of come up with this concept that we could create an artificial conscious entity, an artificial human intelligence, where a robot or a machine or a humanoid would act as if it was a human, but it is not. But we cannot tell exactly where the difference is. So there's an identical version of Mike Vardy, but we know the one is the human and the other is not. And that magic to what makes us human, as long as that question remains unanswered, what it means to be a mensch, and there's a journey to it. And this is very old in terms of philosophy, the path, as long as that is given, there's a chance for us to perceive progress or growth or Lebendigkeit, the vitality. Then we're in a good space. But everything we look to optimize for the sake of optimization, to try to find something else, then we're detached from reality and there's no limitation to that. So I think the whole essence of that experience, making that meal, if you could say that everywhere I am, there I'm in that moment. Everywhere you go, there you are. You are there. You are conscious. You are experiencing. Then the outcome of the meal itself is not the representation of the moment. And I think this is how we should, think about life. So if there is a moment that we want to cherish and live and grow with, sure, order the food. Don't bother at all making the meal, right? Mm-hmm. So there is, in near future, I think, no limitation to what technology can theoretically do. If we could put it out in words, it is literally there. And that's why fiction writers today struggle with coming up with potential future scenarios, because any fiction they write or script out that will be published or on a movie in 3 years basically is then maybe closer to reality. So we play with sci-fi, science, philosophy, and I think that's the interstate and or the borderlines of mind and matter is where we start to play. And we need, I think, more philosophical contemplation, and we need new progress in science. And I think that's what will play out in the next 10 years, because I don't see the limitations to technology. That's my problem.
It's like Interstellar. My son and I watched it the other night again, and we're looking at it going, this is not far-fetched. You've got the Marines that literally are interacting as if they are humans, to the point where they even turn to look at the human characters, and it's just no one's surprised by any of this. It is, and my son actually asked me, we're watching it, and he goes, Dad, like, why are they they're driving cars that are, like we would see today? And I'm like, well, yeah, this is supposed to be in the near future. And honestly, you walk around our neighborhood here in Victoria, and you see Westphalias and you see old muscle cars. What's the difference? The difference might be how it ends up going that way. And in that story, it likely is that they stopped making cars because of the blight. Not like, we don't know, but you're right. Like, it's so much closer, and that would be a challenge. I want to shift gears to shift back to the idea of, when people think of Vikings as well, they think of explorers. They think of, they get in the ships and they go, which kind of leads back to the idea of humans, exploring. Is that a form of optimization? And if so, like, what's the distinction there that you think, especially when it comes in relationship to the Viking Code? Because there is a distinction, but I think it can get blurred.
Yeah. I think you're right. But I also think that, the question is, do you measure against where you are in life? So if you measure your progress from where you are, you can have setbacks, you can have diseases, break up in relationships, something unforeseen economically can happen. You are, quote unquote, thrown back. Then if you compare to where you were, you will be in misery. But again, the journey starts for progress. And I think this is the very essence of that exploration, that, yes, they were seeking new grounds and they were out exploring, but there is also something that is very tied to the communal, the collective of living and growing and experiencing these experiences. And I think that is, for me, in the Viking Code, I write a lot about that. We talked about in the beginning about that play between individualism and collectivism.
Mm-hmm.
So I see today that we have become a reactive society that gets worn out and tired and want to have a sabbatical and needs a retreat and all of that. And that is because everything that we are activated to do comes from tasks that are put upon us. We are extrinsically driven and not intrinsically. So if we have an activation from within, something that I want to seek out and I can't do it, I have the will to do it, then I have an infinite resilience or power or even self-confidence to explore when it comes from within, which is again feedbacks to where I come from instead of being reactive. So on the one hand, we have a reactive society that gets tired and inactive, which I think is terrible. And then the other one, you have that playful. And that is deeply rooted to the Norwegian culture. So it's not a culture of performance, it's a culture of play. And this was also probably the foundation of the Vikings. They wanted to go out in the nature. They were on the sea, open boats. They were creative, built light boats, carried them across land. They wanted to push the borders and just to be open about the possibilities. They were not naive optimists, although you could say that when you go into the ocean. And they were not pessimists. They were in a realm of possibilism. What could we do? What can we achieve? And I like this term possibilism that I think was coined by Hans Rosling, Swedish professor the founder of the Gapminder Foundation, that passed away too early. And what he did, he pointed out what we can do. He used fact, he used data, he used knowledge in order to bring people to start to do stuff and see the world from a possibilistic standpoint. And I think this was very much the foundation of the Vikings, and it has carried on today. But there is a phenomenon that we can maybe touch upon in the book called janteloven. if that's okay with you.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
just touch upon that, because that puts it pretty much into context. What happened? What is the essence of the Viking code of the modern Viking? So we had the old traditional barbarian Vikings, and then we had a time period in Norway where we were, per cultural ethos of that everything should be the same. So there's a book that was published back in 1930, I think, from Axel Sandemose, and he writes about the law of Moses in an sarcastic way of telling everyone you should not believe in yourself, you should not think that you're better than anyone, and you should keep everyone down grounded. There
So
are
it was
various culture.
satire.
Yeah.
Like he was writing it
Yes.
satirically.
Exactly, but it was a sarcastic way of putting into that, because he pointed out the necessity for the collective, and this is like cutting the flowers all in the same size, and everything should be conditioned to that. So Norwegian were sitting on the side and having a lot of skills, but weren't the people that wanted to go out and conquer the world, which was, the contrary to the Vikings. And early 2000s, some of these young athletes started to say, I'm good. I'm going to be the world's champion in chess. I'm going to be the best female golfer on the planet. And they had an edgy touch. So the Norwegians said, well, we are patriots and it's cool, but that they weren't really tied to that cultural phenomena. And after that, followed now 20 years of the athletes that I mentioned in the book, they have managed to combine the cultural ethos of collectivism, yet still have self-confidence to go out and be modern Vikings and conquer the world in their discipline. And this is very interesting, because it's not even known to the Norwegian why they are so successful in these crazy big sports that no Norwegians ever thought we could win: running and soccer and tennis and golf and beach volleyball, because it has nothing to do with snow. So this is, the essence also of the Viking Code, to see that we have overcome this law of Jante. And I grew up with this. You shouldn't stand out. You shouldn't believe in yourself to that extent. First, you serve the community, the collective. And overcoming that is, I think, a very good philosophy for life and for the world. So with the Declaration of Independence, the individualism of the US, there is a declaration of interdependence. The interdependency to understand that I can only be an individual in relationship to other human beings. I am because you are. So these two united, that is the philosophical foundation of the Viking Code, that I personally think is a very healthy state for a global philosophy of an active life.
Yeah, I'm actually, just as we were talking about this, there's a article, I'll share it in the show notes, from earlier in 2024, why the law of Jante mindset is both loved and hated in Scandinavia. It's like a, and I remember seeing a documentary. I want to say it was the This Is Pop musical series on Netflix, where they were talking about, and again, this is beyond Norway, it was Scandinavian in general, but the musical production, like there's a lot of great pop music produced out of Scandinavia, and that law, it's almost, and now it's coming back to me, where the producers kind of, they're the ones that are doing a lot of the work that makes it sound great, but they fly under the radar. They're not the stars. They're just they're doing it for, they're living up to that law. Does that sound accurate? Am I misremembering this, or does that sound spot on?
Yeah, there were, there were people obviously that stood out, and a lot of Swedes. So the Swedish people were more entrepreneurial and more explorative in that extent. And Norway have the resources with the oil. They thought that is a foundation for success. But then again, many oil countries would have the same success in these sports then, if that was the sole success factor. So yeah, it's true to the extent that it was more represented in Swedish culture, very extrinsic, also artists and creatives. You see that also with the startup scene, with technology. But in Norway, it has been a slow transition. And funny to observe is also the fact that these phenomena is now a lot of young men, and they have a very strong relationship to their father or a mentor who is as a father. And they have that foundation. They have a relationship to their girlfriend from high school before they got famous. So there are very many interesting things that I discovered about how they have kept that, ethical, solid ground to stand on. And one might wonder if that is also a key for their success. And I argue that a lot of these things are important in life. There are obviously other forms to get high performance, but you see it more and more in team sport, how, it has become more of this collective where the individual can stand out. And I think this is actually a thing that in business and particularly in politics, we can learn a lesson or two from this way of living. And I think it would be very important to get this type of reflection and thinking into the educational system, not only in, the US and Canada and Germany and Norway and Scandinavia, but I think around the world, this is a philosophy that could unify a world that desperately needs more unification than borders and division.
So I'm going to read a quick excerpt because this stood out to me in the epilogue where you talk about the life in itself. Humans were not made for limitations. We are explorers, social beings inherently programmed for discovery and connection. So when we talk about change, especially behavioral change, it should be about breaking existing boundaries and harnessing our innate urge to explore. And this is the kicker. The real catalyst for change is not fear or restriction. It's inspiration. And I am a huge fan of the Green Lantern who fights fear with will. And I wonder, just as we wrap up, how does someone kind of push away from fear and lean into, and restriction, but lean into that inspirational component that you're talking about?
Yeah, I think there are two sides to that question. One is you have inspirational leaders that can inspire people and get them fired up and ready to go. I think when the boats were set out on the open sea and you thought the world was flat, then you would ask the Viking, leader, where are we going? And he would say, I have no idea. Where are we going? I have no idea. When will we come back? I have no idea. Will we come back? I have no idea. And everyone would scream, great idea, let's go. That's type of leadership. That's something special. But I think the other part of that story is understanding. And behavioral change comes from finding incentives for change rather than limitation and regulation. We need structure, we need laws and regulations. But if you look at a complex problem like climate change, and I am convinced that finding an incentive for change is the big factor that will help us tackle climate to a much more rapid and fast transition into a better ecosystem. That is basically understanding that ecology or sustainability is efficiency of resources. If you're not efficient with resources, your life gets exhausting. If you have to own a lot of stuff and have that as a definition of who you are. So efficiency or an efficient, effective use of resources is literally how you make money. So in 10 years from now, the word sustainability will go out of the vocabulary and it will all be baked into the economy. And companies that are not efficient and take care of the people that they have, they will not make any money. And that's the incentive to see that actually capitalism and coming up with better business models or better products that where economy and ecology are united is the path forward. Because I think in 10 years, the marginal cost of energy will have dropped towards zero and we'll have a lot of new technologies and breakthroughs. And the ones that want to perform or be successful in the business world, they best understand that today is the time to anticipate these future scenarios. And that comes from understanding. If you can anticipate how human behavior could be in 5 or 10 years, you could start to work on your business model and you could be the quote unquote, in that definition, the winner of tomorrow. So I think understanding, a deep understanding of technology, a deep understanding of human behavior, a generalistic understanding of the world where you can adapt to new circumstances, that can also put you in a place of that inspiration. Because let me end with my personal story with this book. So I was a professional athlete I was a hardcore capitalist. So many would say that I would be successful from an outside perspective, but I never felt success. Today I talk to you and I am really successful. To me, for myself, because I get up every morning and learn. I have the beauty and the wonder to experience progress. I have an incentive to get on and learn because there's something magical about seeing those relations. So I focus on that input and I'm not so worried. There will come an output. There will be an invoice. You will cover some things. You will get on. But if you emphasize that, the world, the Lebendigkeit, the vitality of life, then to me, you are really successful. And then results most likely will follow as they have done for these modern Vikings. Put in the effort, but also have that experience. And that is the incentive for me to get up every day in the morning. So I think the understanding part is really important.
The book is called The Viking Code, The Art and Science of Norwegian Success. Anders, thanks so much for taking the time to join me today. Where can people pick up the book and keep up with the work that you're doing?
Yeah, Mike, thank you so much for having me. AndersIndset.com is my website. I'm on LinkedIn, occasionally some private tours when I'm out speaking or traveling. I put out on Instagram with my name as the tag, but we are putting out new information, articles, interviews, and some videos on the website. So that's the best way to keep in touch and to link up on LinkedIn.
Thanks so much for having a productive conversation with me today.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks to Anders for joining me. You can check out all of the links we discussed. There's plenty of them, the books that we talked about and how to get those at mikevardy.com/podcast583 or wherever you get your podcasts, because the show notes are right there. So Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Overcast, wherever you get your podcasts, you can just click on the links there and you're on your way. And by the way, while you are listening to this episode on wherever you're getting your podcasts, subscribe to the show. It's one way to support the show, one of the best ways to support the show. And it makes it easier to easily search through the archives of previous conversations with people like David Allen, Gretchen Rubin, Chris Bailey, Cal Newport, and many, many more over the 580 plus episodes that we've shared so far. Plus, it'll ensure you don't miss a single episode of what's to come. Another way to support the show is to check out the sponsors that you heard during our conversation today. Go to mikevardy.com/podcast sponsors. Click on any of the sponsors links that resonate with you, and that way they know that we sent you. That's it for this episode of A Productive Conversation. Subscribers, we're going to have a Flashback Friday episode coming up for you next, so stick around for that. You won't want to miss that one. And until next time, I'm Mike Vardy, the host of A Productive Conversation, reminding you to stop doing productive and start being productive. See you later.